The sun was just starting to warm up the driveway when Detective Chief Robert Hayes began setting up his garage sale. It was one of those perfect Saturday mornings where the air still had that cool freshness before the heat really kicked in. Birds were chirping, someone down the street was mowing their lawn, and everything felt peaceful. Robert had been planning this sale for almost 2 months. After 25 years working his way up through the police department, he'd finally made detective chief 6 months ago. The promotion came with longer hours and more responsibility, but also a better paycheck. His wife Linda had been after him for years to clean out the garage, and now seemed like the perfect time. They were finally getting rid of all the stuff that had been collecting dust for way too long. He'd lived in Oakmont Hills for 15 years now. It was one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where people mostly kept to themselves but would wave when you drove by. Nothing fancy, just regular folks with regular jobs trying to live their lives. Robert liked it that way. After spending his days dealing with the worst of humanity, coming home to a boring, predictable street was exactly what he needed. Most of his neighbors knew he worked in law enforcement, though he never really talked about it much. When people asked what he did, he'd usually just say he worked for the city and change the subject. Some of the older neighbors had figured out over the years that he was pretty high up in the department, but nobody really made a big deal about it. That's what Robert appreciated most about this place. He dragged out an old leather couch that had been taking up half the garage. Linda wanted it gone after they bought the new sectional last year. There were boxes of kitchen stuff they never used, old lamps, a coffee table with a wobbly leg, and at least 20 boxes of books. Linda was a reader, always had been, but she'd finally agreed to part with some of them since they'd run out of shelf space years ago. Robert had done his homework before setting everything up. He'd pulled up the Homeowners Association rules 3 days ago and read through the whole section about garage sales. According to the bylaws, residents were allowed 2 sales per year as long as they gave 48 hours notice to the HOA board. Simple enough. He'd sent an email to the official HOA address on Thursday afternoon, right there in his records with the timestamp and everything. All the boxes were checked. He made sure every single table and rack was positioned completely on his property. Not an inch over the property line onto the sidewalk. Robert had measured it twice, actually. When you've spent as many years as he had making sure evidence was documented properly and procedures were followed to the letter, you didn't take chances with details, even for something as simple as a garage sale. By 9:30, he had everything arranged and price tags on most items. A few early bird shoppers started showing up around 10. There was an older gentleman who bought 3 boxes of mystery novels for $20. A young couple looking for furniture for their first apartment circled the couch a few times, talking in low voices about whether it would fit in their living room. A mom with 2 kids in tow was flipping through the children's books. Robert was helping the young couple measure the couch when he noticed someone marching across the street toward his house. She was probably in her mid-50s, dressed like she was heading to a business meeting instead of a Saturday morning in the suburbs. She had this large black binder clutched against her chest and a look on her face that Robert had seen 1,000 times before. It was the look of someone who'd already decided they were right before they even opened their mouth. The woman didn't wait for him to finish with his customers. She walked right up and stood there, tapping her foot, making it very clear she expected his immediate attention. Robert excused himself from the couple and turned to her with a polite smile. "Good morning. Can I help you with something? Do you have a permit for this sale?" The woman's voice was sharp, clipped. No introduction, no pleasantries, just straight into attack mode. Robert kept his tone friendly and even. 25 years of dealing with difficult people had taught him that staying calm was always the best approach. The HOA allows 2 garage sales per year with proper notice. I sent the required notification to the board on Thursday. The woman's eyes narrowed. She shifted the binder to one arm and put her other hand on her hip. I'm on the board, and I didn't receive any notification. I sent it to the official HOA email address listed in the bylaws, Robert explained. It went out Thursday at 2:47 in the afternoon. I don't care what time you claim to have sent it. I'm Barbara Henderson, and I'm the HOA compliance coordinator. If I didn't see it, it wasn't properly submitted. She said it with the kind of authority that suggested she was used to people backing down when she pulled. Robert noticed a few of his customers had stopped browsing and were watching the exchange. The young couple by the couch looked uncomfortable. The mom with the kids was trying to pretend she wasn't listening while clearly listening to every word. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but I followed the procedures exactly as they're written in the bylaws, Robert said, keeping his voice level and respectful. Maybe there was an issue with the email system, but I have the confirmation that it was delivered. Barbara's face was starting to turn red. Furthermore, your tables are extending onto the public sidewalk, which is a violation of County Code 7.3.2. And you're creating a traffic hazard with all these people parking on the street. Robert glanced at his setup. He knew for a fact that everything was well within his property line because he'd measured it. Twice. As for the parking, there were maybe 3 cars on the street, and it was a Saturday morning with plenty of space. But he could see that Barbara wasn't actually interested in facts. She'd come over here with her mind made up. I can assure you everything is positioned on my property, Robert said calmly. Would you like to verify the property line? Don't patronize me, Barbara snapped. Her voice was getting louder now, carrying across the driveway and into the street. I've lived in this neighborhood for 3 years, and I've worked very hard to maintain our community standards. We have rules for a reason. People like you move into a nice area and think you can just do whatever you want. That last comment made Robert raise an eyebrow. People like you. He'd heard that phrase before, usually right before things got uglier, but he kept his expression neutral and his tone professional. I respect the community standards, which is why I made sure to follow all the proper procedures, Robert said. But if you'd like to discuss this further, perhaps we could talk after the sale. I have customers waiting. A few more neighbors had come out of their houses now, drawn by Barbara's raised voice. Robert recognized old Mrs. Patterson from next door. She was shaking her head and looking embarrassed. Tom Wilson from 2 houses down was watching from his porch with his arms crossed, frowning. Barbara pulled out her phone and held it up like it was a weapon. Since you refuse to cooperate and shut down this illegal operation, I'm calling the police. We'll see how smart you feel when they get here and cite you for all these violations. Robert almost smiled but caught himself. Instead, he just nodded. That's absolutely your right, ma'am. You should do what you feel is necessary. His calm response seemed to make Barbara even angrier. She'd probably expected him to panic or argue or back down. When he didn't, she turned away and started jabbing at her phone, talking loud enough for everyone to hear, as she reported an illegal commercial operation in progress at a residential address. The young couple quietly slipped away to their car. The mom with the kids bought the book she'd been looking at and left quickly, clearly not wanting to be around for whatever was about to happen. Robert didn't blame them. He went back to organizing his tables and helping the remaining customers, acting like nothing unusual was happening. Inside, though, he was already thinking about how this situation was about to play out, and he had a pretty good idea it wasn't going to go the way Barbara Henderson expected. Barbara stood on the sidewalk with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking loudly enough that half the block could hear her. She was giving the dispatcher Robert's address and launching into a detailed description of all his supposed violations. Every few seconds, she'd glance back at him with this look that said she thought she'd already won. Robert continued helping an elderly man who was interested in an old toolbox. He kept his movements casual and relaxed, like he had all the time in the world. The man paid $5 for the toolbox and told Robert it reminded him of one his father used to have. They chatted for a minute about how things were built better back in the day, just normal conversation while Barbara continued her dramatic phone call in the background. More neighbors were coming out now. It was turning into a bit of a spectacle. Mrs. Patterson from next door walked over to Robert and spoke quietly. I'm so sorry about this. She's been doing this to everyone since she moved in. Last month she reported the Johnsons for having their trash cans out 4 hours too early. Robert gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Tom Wilson called out from his porch. Hey Barbara, maybe you should actually check if someone's breaking a rule before you call the cops on them. Barbara shot him a glare that could have frozen water. This doesn't concern you, Tom. I'm protecting our property values. By harassing people having a garage sale? Tom shook his head and went back inside. But Robert noticed he left his front door open, clearly planning to watch whatever happened next. Barbara finished her call and marched back over to Robert's driveway. Her face was flushed with what looked like a mix of anger and satisfaction. The police are on their way. They said they'd be here within 20 minutes. I suggest you start packing this all up right now if you want to avoid getting cited. Robert was repositioning a lamp on one of the tables. He looked up at her with the same calm expression he'd maintained this whole time. I'll wait and talk to the officers when they arrive. You're making a huge mistake, Barbara said. She was standing with her arms crossed now, the binder tucked under one arm like she was guarding nuclear launch codes. I have documentation of every single violation here. My photos are time-stamped. I've measured the distance from your tables to the public sidewalk, and you're at least 6 inches over the property line. Robert knew for a fact he wasn't, but there was no point arguing about it. The officers can measure it themselves when they get here. This wasn't the reaction Barbara wanted. She seemed to feed off confrontation, and Robert's refusal to engage was clearly frustrating her. She started pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, muttering to herself and flipping through her binder. Every few seconds, she'd look at her watch, then back at Robert's driveway. A few brave souls stopped by to browse despite the drama. A teenager bought a stack of old video games. A woman asked about the coffee table and ended up taking it for $15. Robert helped her load it into her trunk while Barbara watched disapprovingly, like he was committing crimes right in front of her. "You're still conducting business," Barbara called out. "The dispatcher told you to cease operations." Robert shut the trunk for his customer and turned to Barbara. "Actually, she didn't. I was standing right here. You told the dispatcher what was happening, and they said they'd send officers to check it out. That's not the same as ordering me to shut down." Barbara's face went from red to almost purple. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying there might be a misunderstanding about what was said on your phone call," Robert replied evenly. "We'll clear it up when the officers arrive." The next 15 minutes felt longer than they probably were. Barbara stayed on the sidewalk like she was standing guard, making sure Robert didn't try to escape or hide evidence or whatever she thought he might do. She took more photos with her phone. She made notes in her binder. She even pulled out a tape measure at one point and tried to measure the distance from Robert's tables to the street, though her measurements were so obviously wrong that even she seemed to realize it, and stuffed the tape measure back in her pocket. Robert kept doing what he'd been doing all morning. Greeting customers, answering questions about items, making small talk. A few neighbors came by specifically because they'd heard about the drama and wanted to show support. Mrs. Patterson bought a set of dishes she probably didn't need. The Johnsons from down the street, the ones Barbara had reported for the trash can incident, stopped by and bought an old floor lamp, making very sure to thank Robert loudly enough for Barbara to hear. Then the police car turned onto their street. It was a standard patrol car, black and white with the city logo on the side. It pulled up and parked right in front of Robert's house. 2 officers got out, a woman and a man, both looking like they'd done this kind of call about 100 times before and weren't particularly excited about doing it again. Barbara practically ran to meet them. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. I'm Barbara Henderson, the HOA compliance coordinator for this neighborhood. This man," she pointed at Robert like he was a fugitive, "is running an illegal commercial operation without proper permits. He's obstructing the public sidewalk, creating traffic hazards, and when I confronted him about it, he became hostile and refused to comply." The female officer, her name tag said Rodriguez, pulled out a small tablet and started taking notes. "Okay, ma'am. Let's start with your name and address." While Barbara gave her information, the male officer, Chen according to his badge, walked toward Robert's driveway. He got about halfway there when he stopped, and his expression changed. It was subtle, just a slight widening of his eyes and a change in his posture. He looked at Robert, then back at his partner, then back at Robert again. "Chief Hayes?" Officer Chen said, and his voice had that surprised tone of someone who just ran into their boss at the grocery store. Robert gave him a small nod and a slight smile. He put one finger to his lips in a quick keep it quiet gesture. Chen caught it and adjusted his expression back to professional neutrality, but the damage was done. Rodriguez had heard her partner and looked over sharply. Barbara was still talking, running through her list of violations from her binder, but she'd heard it too. Her voice trailed off mid-sentence. "Wait, did you just call him Chief?" Rodriguez and Chen exchanged a quick glance, the kind of wordless communication that partners develop after working together for a while. Rodriguez cleared her throat. "Ma'am, let's focus on the complaint. You said there's a sidewalk obstruction?" But Barbara wasn't letting it go. She looked at Robert with new suspicion in her eyes. "Chief of what? Are you their supervisor or something?" Robert didn't answer. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed and unbothered. The less he said right now, the better. Officer Chen walked over to the driveway and started examining the setup. He pulled out his own tablet and began taking photos, documenting the distance between the tables and the property line. His measurements made it very clear that everything was well within Robert's property boundaries. Rodriguez joined him, and the two officers moved methodically through the driveway, checking each of Barbara's claims. They measured. They took photos. They made notes. Barbara followed them around like a nervous dog, her binder open, pointing out things and making comments that the officers mostly ignored. "What about the permit?" Barbara finally demanded, her voice getting shrill. "He doesn't have a permit for this." Rodriguez looked up from her tablet. "Ma'am, garage sales don't require police permits in this jurisdiction. That's a matter between you and your homeowners association. But I'm on the HOA board." Barbara's voice was getting louder again. "He never notified us." Robert walked into his garage and came back with a manila folder. He opened it and pulled out several printed pages. "This is my email notification to the HOA board, sent Thursday at 2:47 p.m. Here's the delivery confirmation showing it was received. And these are the relevant sections of the HOA bylaws regarding garage sales, which I've highlighted." He handed the papers to Officer Rodriguez, who looked them over carefully. Her partner leaned in to read over her shoulder. After a minute, Rodriguez looked up at Barbara. "These documents appear to be in order, ma'am. The notification was sent to the official HOA email address with proper timing." Barbara snatched the papers from Rodriguez's hand and started scanning through them frantically. Her confidence from earlier was starting to crack. You could see it in the way her hands shook slightly as she held the papers, the way her eyes darted across the text looking for some mistake she could point out. "But I didn't get this email," Barbara insisted. "I check the HOA email every day." Tom Wilson had come back out onto his porch. "Barbara, you're not actually on the board, remember? You sent everyone that memo last month saying you appointed yourself as compliance coordinator. But that's not an official position." Several other neighbors who'd gathered to watch made sounds of agreement. One woman called out, "The actual board members are the Hendersons on Oak Street, not you." Barbara's face went white, then red again. The papers in her hands were shaking more noticeably now. I'm helping the board, I'm coordinating compliance." Officer Rodriguez spoke in that careful diplomatic tone that cops use when they're trying to de-escalate a situation. "Ma'am, based on our inspection, there are no violations here. Everything is legal and properly permitted. We're going to clear this call as unfounded." Barbara looked like she'd been slapped. "Unfounded? But he's clearly running a business operation here, and you two are just covering for him because he's one of you. What is he, some beat cop? I want to file a complaint. I want your badge numbers. I'm going to call your supervisor right now." The two officers looked uncomfortable. This was the moment when things could go from bad to worse, and everyone standing around watching could feel the tension ratcheting up another notch. The silence that followed Barbara's demand for badge numbers was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officers Rodriguez and Chen stood there looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The small crowd of neighbors that had gathered on porches and lawns watched, with the kind of fascination people have when they know something big is about to happen but they're not sure what. Barbara had her phone out again, finger hovering over the screen. "I'm serious. I want both your badge numbers right now, and I want the name and direct number of your supervisor. This is obvious corruption. You show up, see your buddy here, and suddenly nothing's wrong. I wasn't born yesterday." Officer Rodriguez took a slow breath, the kind you take when you're trying very hard to remain professional. "Ma'am, our badge numbers are visible on our uniforms. Officer Chen is badge 4721 and I'm badge 4683. You're welcome to file any complaint you feel is necessary." "And your supervisor?" Barbara pressed. "I want to talk to whoever's in charge of you two." Chen shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "That would be Captain Martinez." "Fine. Get him on the phone right now." Barbara crossed her arms, that binder still tucked under one elbow like it was glued there. "Ma'am, the captain doesn't take calls during patrol complaints," Rodriguez explained. Her voice still professionally polite but with an edge of tiredness creeping in. "You can file a formal complaint at the station or through our website." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "Of course you're not going to call him?" "Because you know you're in the wrong here." She turned to Robert, pointing at him with her phone. "And you, standing there all smug and quiet. I know your type. You probably told them to cover for you. Well, it's not going to work. I have connections too." My ex-husband is a lawyer, and when I tell him about this, you're all going to be in serious trouble." Robert had been leaning against his garage door frame this whole time, just watching the situation unfold. He hadn't said a word since handing over the documents. Now he straightened up and walked slowly toward where the officers and Barbara were standing. "Mrs. Henderson," he said quietly, "I don't think calling Captain Martinez is going to help your situation." "Oh, really?" Barbara shot back. "And why is that? Because you're all in this together? Because cops protect cops no matter what?" Several neighbors winced at that. Tom Wilson shook his head. Mrs. Patterson looked embarrassed for Barbara, even though Barbara had been nothing but hostile to everyone. Robert reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a simple black leather wallet, worn at the edges from years of use. He flipped it open with a practiced motion, the kind of gesture he'd probably done 10,000 times before. Inside was a gold badge. Not the silver ones that Rodriguez and Chen wore on their uniforms. This one gleamed in the morning sunlight with an eagle at the top and text that was clear even from a few feet away. Next to the badge was an ID card with Robert's photo and official credentials. "Detective Chief Robert Hayes, Major Crimes Division," he said calmly, holding the wallet so Barbara could see it clearly. "Captain Martinez reports to me. Officers Rodriguez and Chen report to Captain Martinez, which means they both ultimately report to me." The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. Barbara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes went from the badge to Robert's face and back to the badge again, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. The color drained from her face so fast you'd think someone had pulled a plug. The crowd of neighbors erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations. Someone laughed, quickly cutting it off, but not quite fast enough. Mrs. Patterson's hand went to her mouth. Tom Wilson let out a low whistle. You're joking," Barbara finally managed to say, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. It came out thin and shaky. Robert closed his wallet and put it back in his pocket. "I'm not joking. I've been with the department for 25 years. Made detective chief 6 months ago. I live here because it's quiet and I like the neighborhood. I work irregular hours because I'm usually dealing with major crime investigations. And today I'm trying to have a garage sale because my wife has been asking me to clean out our garage for the last 2 years." Barbara looked like she might be sick. Her face had gone from pale to slightly green. "I didn't. How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't supposed to know," Robert said, and his tone wasn't angry or mocking. It was just matter of fact. "But that's kind of the point. You didn't know anything about me. Didn't know anything about whether I was actually breaking any rules, but you decided I was a problem anyway and called the police." Officer Chen cleared his throat. "Chief, we can handle this if you want. File the report and move on." Robert shook his head. "No need." Mrs. Henderson was concerned about neighborhood rules. "That's not a crime." She was wrong about the facts, but she had a right to call and report what she thought was a problem. Barbara was staring at the ground now, her binder hanging limply in her hands. All that aggressive energy from before had completely evaporated. I thought. "You thought I was breaking the rules and you wanted to enforce them," Robert said. "I get it. But maybe next time, verify that someone's actually violating something before you call the police. Talk to your neighbors first. Get to know people. We're all just trying to live our lives here." Rodriguez and Chen were both looking extremely relieved that this wasn't turning into the disaster it could have been. Rodriguez closed her tablet. "Chief, if there's nothing else, we'll clear this call and get back to patrol." "You're good to go," Robert told them. "Thanks for responding." The two officers headed back to their patrol car, probably eager to escape the awkwardness. As they got in, Chen could be heard saying something to his partner about how this was going to be a story at the station for months. Their car pulled away, leaving Robert and Barbara and about a dozen neighbors watching from various yards. Barbara still hadn't moved. She was standing there like her feet had grown roots, clutching her binder and looking at the ground. A tear rolled down her cheek and she wiped it away quickly with the back of her hand. "I made a complete fool of myself," she said quietly. It wasn't really directed at anyone, more like she was talking to herself. Robert's expression softened a bit. "Look, we all make mistakes. I've spent 25 years dealing with actual criminals and troublemakers. You're not either of those things. You're just someone who got a little overzealous about neighborhood rules." "A little?" Tom Wilson called out from his porch. "Barbara, you reported me last month for washing my car in my own driveway. Said it was wasting water during a drought. And you told the Johnsons their Christmas lights were too bright, Mrs. Patterson added. In December. And you sent Kelly across the street a citation for her kids' chalk drawings on her own sidewalk. Someone else chimed in. Barbara's shoulders sagged with each comment. I was trying to help. I thought I was making things better. Mrs. Patterson walked over, her expression kind despite everything. Honey, you can't help a neighborhood by making everyone miserable. These rules exist to help us live together peacefully, not to give someone power over everyone else. Robert nodded. She's right. A good neighborhood isn't about strict enforcement of every little rule. It's about people getting along, helping each other out, maybe cutting each other some slack when someone needs it. Barbara finally looked up at him. Her eyes were red, and she looked smaller somehow than she had when she'd first marched across the street. I moved here after my divorce 2 years ago. I didn't know anyone. I thought if I could help with the HOA, people would appreciate it, would accept me. There was genuine pain in her voice, the kind that made everyone watching feel at least a little bit bad for her, even after everything she'd done. The way to get people to accept you is to be a good neighbor, Mrs. Patterson said gently. Come to the block parties. Wave when people drive by. Help when someone needs it. That's what builds community. Not sending everyone citations and calling the cops on their garage sales, Tom added. But his tone was less harsh than before. Barbara nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes again. I'm sorry. To all of you. I've been awful. She looked at Robert. Especially to you. I accused you of all kinds of things and I was completely wrong about everything. Robert gave her a small smile. Like I said, everyone makes mistakes. The question is what you do after. You could double down and stay angry. Or you could learn from it and do better. I don't even know where to start doing better, Barbara admitted. Maybe start by actually joining the HOA instead of appointing yourself to positions that don't exist, Tom suggested. The real board meets the first Tuesday of every month. Come to a meeting. Learn what the actual rules are. Mrs. Patterson put a gentle hand on Barbara's shoulder, and maybe come by for coffee sometime. I'm usually home in the mornings. We can chat. No binders, no bylaws, just two neighbors getting to know each other. A few other neighbors offered similar invitations. The Johnson said she should come to the next block party. Someone else mentioned a book club that met twice a month. Slowly, the hostility in the air dissolved into something that felt almost like community support. Barbara looked overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. I don't deserve this. Any of you being nice to me? Probably not, Tom said with a slight grin. But that's kind of the point. Neighbors forgive each other and move on. Unless you keep being terrible, then all bets are off. That got a few laughs, including a small, wet chuckle from Barbara herself. Barbara stood there for another moment, looking like she wanted to say something else but couldn't quite find the words. Finally, she just nodded, hugged her binder to her chest, and walked back across the street to her house. Everyone watched her go, and once her front door closed, the crowd started to break up. People headed back to their own yards, though plenty of them were still talking and gesturing, clearly discussing what had just happened. Robert turned back to his garage sale. The whole confrontation had taken maybe 40 minutes, but it felt longer. A few items had sold during the drama, and he straightened up the remaining tables, rearranging things to fill in the gaps. Tom Wilson walked over, shaking his head with a grin. Man, I wish I'd recorded that. The look on her face when you pulled out that badge was priceless. Probably better you didn't, Robert said. She's embarrassed enough as it is. You're nicer than I would have been, Tom said. She's been making everyone miserable for months. Maybe this will finally get her to back off. Mrs. Patterson came over too, carrying a pitcher of lemonade and some plastic cups. I thought you might want something cold after all that excitement. You handled that beautifully, by the way. Very gracious. Robert thanked her and poured himself a cup. The lemonade was perfect, tart and sweet at the same time. A few other neighbors drifted over, some to browse the sale items, others just to chat. The whole atmosphere had changed. Before, most people had kept their distance, but now it felt more relaxed. Like the drama had somehow broken down invisible walls. The Johnsons, a couple in their 60s, bought the old couch. Said it would be perfect for their basement where their grandkids played. They asked Robert how long he'd been a detective chief, and he gave them the short version. 25 years with the department. Worked his way up through patrol, then detective, then sergeant, and finally chief of the Major Crimes Division 6 months ago. We always wondered what you did, Mr. Johnson said. You kept such odd hours. Sometimes we'd see you leaving at 2 in the morning or coming home at sunrise. That's the job, Robert explained. Criminals don't work 9 to 5, so neither do we. A younger couple stopped by asking about some kitchen appliances. They were newlyweds, just bought their first house 2 streets over. They'd heard the commotion and came to see what was happening, then stayed to shop. They ended up buying a blender, a toaster, and a set of mixing bowls for $20 total. Linda, Robert's wife, came out of the house around noon with sandwiches and more cold drinks. She'd been inside during the whole confrontation, watching through the front window. I can't believe Barbara actually called the police on you, she said, laughing. Of all the people in this neighborhood to pick a fight with. She didn't know, Robert said, biting into his sandwich. That's kind of the point of not advertising what I do. Still, Linda shook her head. I almost came out to tell her, but I figured you had it handled. Always do, Robert said with a smile. The afternoon continued without any more drama. More neighbors stopped by, some buying things, others just introducing themselves properly for the first time. It was funny how one incident had suddenly made Robert more visible to people who'd lived on the same street for years. The quiet guy who kept odd hours was now the detective chief who'd handled an HOA Karen with grace and patience. Around 3 o'clock, Robert noticed someone watching from across the street. It was Barbara standing at her front window, partially hidden behind the curtain. She wasn't being obvious about it, but he could see her there, looking out at the garage sale that was still going strong. Linda noticed too. You think she's okay? Hard to say, Robert replied. Public humiliation's tough, even when you kind of brought it on yourself. You could go talk to her, Linda suggested. Robert thought about it. Part of him felt like he'd done enough. He'd been patient during the confrontation. He'd been gracious after, and he'd even defended her right to call the police in the first place. But another part of him, the part that had spent 25 years learning to read people and understand what drove them, knew that Barbara was probably sitting in her house feeling worse than she'd ever felt. Maybe later, he said. Let her have some space first. By 4 o'clock, most of the good stuff had sold. The couch was gone, most of the kitchen items, the books, the lamps. What remained was the kind of stuff that always remained at garage sales. Random odds and ends that someone might want but probably wouldn't. Robert started packing up the unsold items to donate to the thrift store downtown. Tom Wilson came back over with his wife, Kelly. Hey, we're doing a barbecue tonight. Just burgers and hot dogs, nothing fancy. You and Linda should come by around 6. That sounds great, Linda said before Robert could answer. She knew her husband well enough to know he'd probably say no if left to his own devices. After a long day of dealing with people, Robert usually preferred quiet evenings at home. Perfect, Kelly said. And hey, you should invite Barbara too. Robert raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? She gave you a citation for your kids' chalk drawings. Kelly laughed. Yeah, and that was ridiculous. But I felt bad for her today. She looked so crushed. Maybe she just needs someone to give her a chance. After Tom and Kelly left, Robert looked at Linda. You thinking what I'm thinking? That we should go talk to Barbara before the barbecue? Linda said. Yeah, I am. They finished packing up the remaining items and loaded them into their car. Then together they walked across the street to Barbara's house. It was a nice place, well maintained, with flower beds that were almost too perfect. Everything trimmed and organized with military precision. Robert rang the doorbell. There was a long pause, and he was about to ring again when the door opened a crack. Barbara peered out, her eyes red and puffy. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. I'm not here to make things worse, Robert said quickly. Just wanted to check on you. Barbara opened the door wider but didn't invite them in. I've been sitting here thinking about how stupid I am. Calling the police on a police chief. I'll probably be the laughingstock of the whole neighborhood now. People will talk about it for a few days, then something else will happen and they'll forget, Linda said kindly. That's how neighborhoods work. I don't think I can face anyone after this, Barbara said quietly. I've been so awful to everyone. The things Tom and the others said, they were all true. I've been terrible. Robert leaned against the porch railing. You want to know what I've learned in 25 years of police work? People aren't defined by their worst moments. They're defined by what they do after. You made mistakes, okay, now you know better. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, Barbara admitted. I'm not even sure where to start. Well, you could start tonight, Linda suggested. Tom and Kelly are having a barbecue at 6. Just neighbors, casual, nothing formal. You should come, Barbara looked horrified. I can't do that. After what I did to Kelly's kids? After I reported Tom for washing his car? They invited you, Robert said. Well, Kelly did. Said you should come. People are willing to give you a second chance, Barbara, but you have to be willing to take it. Barbara's eyes filled with tears again. Why would they do that? Why would any of you be nice to me? Because that's what neighbors do, Linda said simply. We forgive each other. We help each other. We give people room to grow and change. You've been treating this neighborhood like a battlefield. But it doesn't have to be that way. I moved here after my divorce, and I was so angry about everything, Barbara said, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in forever. My ex cheated on me, I lost half of everything I'd worked for, and I felt so powerless. When I saw those HOA bylaws, I thought, finally, here's something I can control. Here's somewhere I can make a difference. But I just made everyone hate me instead. Robert nodded. I've seen it before. People who feel powerless in one part of their life try to grab control wherever they can find it. But real power isn't about enforcing rules on other people. It's about building relationships, contributing positively, being someone people want around. I don't know if I can do that, Barbara said. I don't know if I know how. Sure you do, Linda said. You just stop trying so hard. Stop looking for problems and start looking for connections. Come to the barbecue tonight. Don't bring your binder. Don't mention HOA rules. Just come as Barbara, a neighbor who wants to get to know the other people on her street. Barbara was quiet for a long moment. You could see her struggling with it, weighing the embarrassment of facing everyone against the loneliness of staying isolated. Finally, she took a shaky breath. What time? 6 o'clock, Robert said. Tom and Kelly's house, the blue one 4 doors down. Just bring yourself. Nothing else. Okay, Barbara said softly. I'll try. As Robert and Linda walked back across the street, Linda took her husband's hand. You're a good man, you know that? Just doing what's right, Robert said. She needed someone to throw her a rope. We all need that sometimes. Back at their house, Robert finished loading the donation boxes into their car. The garage sale had been successful, both in terms of clearing out clutter and apparently in terms of neighborhood drama. He looked across the street at Barbara's house, wondering if she'd actually show up tonight or if the embarrassment would be too much. Either way, he'd done what he could. The rest was up to her. Linda called from inside. I'm going to make potato salad to bring to the barbecue. You want to help or you want to pretend you're busy? Robert laughed. I'll help. I've had enough excitement for one day. As he headed inside, he noticed Barbara's curtain move again. She was still watching, still trying to decide what to do. Robert hoped she'd make the right choice. Everyone deserved a second chance, even HOA Karens who didn't know when to back down. At 5:45, Robert and Linda walked down the street toward Tom and Kelly's house, carrying the potato salad and a 6-pack of soda. The evening had that perfect, comfortable temperature where you didn't need a jacket, but weren't sweating either. A few kids were riding bikes on the sidewalk, and someone was playing music softly from a backyard a few houses over. Tom had set up his grill in the driveway, and the smell of burgers cooking was already filling the air. A folding table held chips, buns, condiments, and various dishes that other neighbors had brought. There were maybe 15 people there already, standing in small groups, talking and laughing. Kelly came over to greet them. Hey, you made it! Linda, that potato salad looks amazing. Put it on the table there. She lowered her voice. Did Barbara say she was coming? She said she'd try, Robert replied. But I wouldn't be surprised if she chickens out. I hope she comes, Kelly said. I meant what I said earlier. I think she just needs some friends. Robert wasn't so sure. In his experience, people who'd burned as many bridges as Barbara had usually found it easier to stay isolated than to face everyone they'd wronged. But he kept that thought to himself. The next 20 minutes passed pleasantly. Robert found himself talking to Mr. Johnson about fishing. Tom flipped burgers and told jokes. Linda chatted with a group of women about a new restaurant that had opened downtown. It was the kind of casual neighborhood gathering that Robert usually enjoyed. The kind where you didn't have to think too hard or be anyone other than yourself. At 6:15, Barbara still hadn't shown up. Robert caught Kelly glancing down the street a few times, looking disappointed. He was about to tell her not to take it personally when he saw movement at the end of the block. Barbara was walking toward them, slowly, like she was heading to her own execution. She'd changed clothes and fixed her hair, but she still had that uncertain look of someone who wasn't sure they were welcome. She wasn't carrying her binder, which Robert took as a good sign. Kelly saw her and immediately went to meet her, waving cheerfully. "Barbara, you came. I'm so glad. Come on, grab a burger. Tom's about to burn them if someone doesn't eat them soon." Tom called out from the grill. "Hey, I heard that. My burgers are perfectly charred, thank you very much." A few people laughed and the tension broke a little. Barbara managed a weak smile and followed Kelly to the food table. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground, but she was there. That counted for something. Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, went right up to Barbara and started chatting about the weather and her garden like nothing unusual had happened that morning. A few others followed her lead, being polite and including Barbara in conversations without making a big deal about it. Robert watched from a distance, impressed by how the neighborhood was handling things. These were good people. They understood that everyone makes mistakes and that sometimes people just need a chance to be better. Barbara got a burger and some chips and stood awkwardly near the edge of the group. She looked like she wanted to contribute to conversations but wasn't sure how. Every time someone mentioned the HOA or neighborhood rules, even casually, she'd flinch. After about 10 minutes, Robert walked over to her. "How you holding up?" "Everyone's being so nice," Barbara said quietly. "I don't understand why." "Maybe because they're actually nice people," Robert suggested. "You just never gave them a chance to show it before." Barbara nodded, looking down at her plate. "I've been thinking all afternoon about the things I've done, the way I've treated people. It's like I was watching someone else do it, you know? Like I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself." "That's pretty common," Robert said. "When people feel hurt or powerless, sometimes they lash out in weird ways. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable." "I called the police on you for having a garage sale," Barbara said, and there was disbelief in her own voice. "On a detective chief. I threatened to report his officers for corruption." "Who does that?" "Someone who's hurting and doesn't know how to deal with it," Robert replied. "Look, Barbara, I've dealt with actual bad people. People who hurt others on purpose, who don't care about the damage they cause. You're not one of them. You're just someone who made some mistakes while trying to feel like you had some control over your life." Barbara's eyes got watery. "How do I fix it? How do I make up for all the terrible things I've done?" "One day at a time," Robert said. "You start by being a good neighbor. You help when people need help. You stop looking for violations and start looking for opportunities to contribute positively. And you give it time. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight." Tom called out that the second round of burgers was ready. People moved toward the grill, and in the shuffle, Barbara ended up standing next to Kelly. There was an awkward moment of silence. "I'm sorry about the citation I gave you," Barbara said suddenly. "About your kids' chalk drawings. That was ridiculous. They're children. They should be able to draw on the sidewalk." Kelly smiled. "You know what? The kids thought it was funny. They started calling themselves sidewalk criminals. Made a whole game out of it." "Still," Barbara said, "I was out of line." "Way out of line?" "Yeah, you were," Kelly agreed. "But you're here now apologizing, trying to do better. That matters." Over the next hour, something shifted. Maybe it was the food, or the casual atmosphere, or just the fact that Barbara had shown up and was genuinely trying. She started to relax a little. Her shoulders weren't so tense. She laughed at one of Tom's terrible dad jokes. She even contributed to a conversation about the best pizza places in town. Mrs. Patterson sat down next to her at one point. "You know, we do have legitimate HOA concerns sometimes. The board could actually use someone with your attention to detail. But as an actual member, not someone making up their own position. I don't think anyone would want me on the board after today," Barbara said. "You might be surprised," Mrs. Patterson replied. "The next meeting is Tuesday. You should come, not to enforce rules, but to learn what the actual issues are and how the board addresses them. We need people who care about the neighborhood. We just need them to care in the right way." Barbara looked genuinely touched. "I'll think about it. Thank you." As the sun started to set and the evening cooled down, people began drifting home. Robert and Linda helped Tom and Kelly clean up, packing away leftover food and folding chairs. Barbara helped too, without being asked, carrying dishes to the kitchen and wiping down tables. When most people had left, Barbara approached Robert one more time. "I want you to know how sorry I am. Not just about today, but about everything. The way I've treated this neighborhood, the way I've treated you. I was wrong. I know you are, Robert said. And I accept your apology. But don't just apologize to me. Over the next few weeks, make a point to talk to the people you gave citations to. Apologize to them too. Make it right, I will, Barbara promised. I really will. As Robert and Linda walked home in the gathering darkness, Linda squeezed his hand. You handled that whole situation perfectly. From the moment she called the cops to inviting her to the barbecue. I'm proud of you. I just treated her like a person, Robert said. That's all anyone really needs. The next morning was Sunday, and Robert was enjoying a rare day off. He was drinking coffee on his front porch when he saw Barbara checking her mailbox. She saw him and waved. Not the aggressive march across the street from yesterday, just a simple, friendly wave. He waved back. Around noon, Robert's phone buzzed with a text from Captain Martinez. Heard you had an interesting morning yesterday. Rodriguez told me everything. Classic. Robert smiled and texted back. Just another day in the neighborhood. Over the following weeks, things gradually changed. Barbara did show up to the HOA meeting and was shocked to discover that most of the rules she'd been enforcing either didn't exist, or she'd completely misunderstood them. She apologized to Tom for the car washing citation, to the Johnsons for the Christmas lights complaint, and to several others for various incidents. Mrs. Patterson invited her to the neighborhood book club, and Barbara actually went. She joined a local volunteer group that cleaned up the park every other Saturday. She stopped carrying the binder everywhere. Most importantly, she stopped looking for problems and started looking for connections. Robert watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. It reminded him why he'd chosen to live in this neighborhood in the first place. Not because it was perfect, but because it was full of real people who were capable of forgiveness and growth. 3 months later, Robert was cleaning out his garage again, though this time it was just for organization, not a sale. Barbara walked by with her dog, a golden retriever she'd adopted from the shelter. Getting ready for another garage sale? She called out with a smile. Not a chance, Robert laughed. Once was enough excitement. Well, if you do, let me know. I'll help you set up instead of trying to shut you down. They both laughed at that, and Barbara continued her walk. Robert went back to organizing tools, thinking about how one Saturday morning had changed things for the better. Not just for Barbara, but for the whole neighborhood. Sometimes people just needed someone to see past their worst behavior and give them a chance to be better. In his years as a cop,